well, to jump into it, I'll just preface by that, obviously some of this material is going to be reviewed due to the monthly AIS updates. We'd like to keep all of our managers and the public and partners up to date as much as possible with what's going on. So while it might be some review, there might be some new stuff as well, or just a good refresher. As for the AIS treatments, I will briefly discuss them, but I'll let Steve McComas do the deep dive when he does his annual presentation. Sometime in January, I reached out to him, but haven't locked down a date yet. I'm sure he'll be available. He's pretty flexible. Lastly, feel free to cut me off if you have any questions as we go. Got quite a few slides, so if you have something, just spit it out, because I might forget at the end. So I'll jump in with that. We'll begin here with the AIS year-end report. Again, I'll just summarize these reports, and if you want some more additional information, I would recommend reading the report if you haven't done so already, or Steve McComas will do that deep dive that I was talking about. I also try to put everything in the presentation in the order that they appear in the report, so if you want to follow along, you can do so. All right, we'll start with Moody Lake Aeration. The district operated the aeration system from January 4th until March 29th this year. Unlike last year, dissolved oxygens remained at a healthy level the entire winter. Last year, just due to extended periods of overcast and snowpack, dissolved oxygen levels were kind of getting low. Got staff a little bit concerned, but there were no major fish kills in either Moody or Sheilds that were reported to staff. There was a minor one or two in Forest Lake, but nothing major. And then on photo, hang on. Oops. All right, now you should be able to see my pointer. The photo on the right is just the signs that we put up, warning signs, and often the distance is kind of small, but we do a perimeter of little signs just to mark where that open water is going to be, just to prevent any anglers or snowmobiles from accidentally getting too close to where the open water typically opens up. And then on the left is Blaine using a rangefinder just to make sure that that perimeter is within the DNR's regulations for how far away the signs need to be warning people. Moody Lake curlyleaf pondweed. So this year, just like last year, the district received a grant from the DNR to perform this treatment. However, as you can see on the April 16th Blue Water Science Survey, there just wasn't a lot of curlyleaf pondweed in the lake compared to previous years. There's a little bit of light and a couple spots of heavy growth on the north side, but east and west, and certainly south, not much at all. So that was great to see. I'm not entirely sure what was going on, but I'm hopeful that it's connected to the improving water quality on Moody Lake, making conditions a little more favorable for native species and obviously less favorable for curlyleaf pondweed. I went back and took a look at some of the old reports, and evidence for this is that in 2020, the assessment survey found Elodea, which is a native species or commonly known as common waterweed, was found at 22% of survey locations, whereas this year it was found at 69%. So quite the jump up. In 2019, it was at 46%. And then the only other data point that I could find was in 2014 when we did the first point intercept survey for the lake, and it was at 11% back then. So almost 70% of survey spots, a native species was found. So I'm hoping that that's out competing the curlyleaf pondweed, kind of crowding it out. And that's why we're seeing so much less in the lake.
That's a big deal.
It's exciting to see for sure. And
yeah.
I'm hopeful that, Sheilds Lake is kind of the similar size and has kind of the similar makeup of species that once that water quality starts improving too, that we'll see the same thing. So.
And we'll do some targeted communication to each of the lake residents, correct? Lake areas? Yeah,
yeah,
good. All right, wonderful, thank you.
All right, Bone Lake curlyleaf pondweed treatment. So on April 30th, 2021, Blue Water Science went out, did their delineation survey, and again, they found hot spots of curlyleaf pondweed being on the northeast and southwest corners of the lake, It just seems like year after year, these two locations are the hotspots for it. Maybe it's the soil composition or whatnot, but those are typically where we're finding it. A treatment was conducted on May 26th by Lake Management Incorporated with Aquathol K, and as you can see on the right here, treatment was extremely successful and had full lake control of CLP this year. As for Eurasian water milfoil, I didn't include a slide on it just because, as has been the case in many of the past years, it just hasn't been an issue on the lake. There wasn't much on the lake this year again, so didn't really have much of a concern for it, which is obviously great to report. All right. Zebra mussels in Bone Lake. All right, you've heard this recap probably dozens of times, but I'm gonna go through it again for everyone. Zebra mussels were initially discovered in 2019. Shortly after that discovery, treatment was performed by the district and partners around the public access where they were found, monitoring conducted by the DNR. Following that treatment, found veligers to be at high enough abundances to suggest a reproductive population was present somewhere in the lake, we don't know where. Survey continued throughout 2020, nothing was found. And then in 2021, staff continued with the wading surveys, sampler plates, and homeowner outreach, just asking people to take a look at their docks and water equipment as they pull them out. We even hired Blue Water Science again this year to perform a fall diving survey, which the photo here, I believe that Steve McComb was out there swimming around looking for him. Despite all that, we still have not found anything, which is very surprising given that this is the third summer now after their discovery. I think it has been the case with Forest Lake and Comfort Lake that, they were discovered and then next year they were definitely easy to find. And then from there, their population exponentially grows until it tapers off. For whatever reason, we just haven't seen that in Bone Lake. But that kind of ties into the next point I have here. Just a couple of weeks ago, I received a text from Keegan Lunn, the aquatic invasive species specialist at the Minnesota DNR, just asking about zebra mussels in the lake and what we have found. And he too was pretty surprised that we have yet to find anything in the lake. So he has very generously offered to waive the lab fee to do an analysis for the zebra mussel villagers if staff is able to perform the collection of them. So I spoke with Matt Downing at the WCD, and he has the tow nets, and we obviously have the boat this year that we just purchased. So tentatively, we have on the calendar in early June to go out, do a villager tow or a couple of them, and then send it off to the DNR, and hopefully get confirmation if we still think that there's a population somewhere in the lake. Just looking at those numbers and comparing it to the 2019 villager count. There is a possibility that, and after speaking with Keegan Lund, that there has been some metro lakes where they were discovered, but they never took hold. I'm gonna be cautiously optimistic that, maybe we'll have a similar situation with Bone Lake, but it'll be good to get confirmation on that. So something to come here soon. I don't have a slide for this either, but just coming back around to water hyacinths and non-native Phragmites in and around Bone Lake. I just didn't include it because there hasn't been an update for the last couple of years. 2019, we found both species and we treated it. We removed the water hyacinth, and whatever was missed was likely killed by freezing temperatures throughout the winter. It's not a very frost-tolerant species. And then for the non-native Phragmites, I think to the east of the lake, there was a small 900 square foot patch that we treated. Since then, it has been practically eradicated from the area, and a lot of native species like native arrowhead have popped up in its place. So that was pretty exciting to see. So moving forward next year, I'm going to pull those two items from the AIS report just because I don't ever have anything to say about them. But we're going to keep an eye on things and make sure that they don't pop up. But seems to be a success. And one more thing on the non-native Phragmites. So there's a pretty collaborative group of metro partners that are working together to manage non-native Phragmites. There's a researcher at MACERC who has been documenting locations of all the populations. And in just the 8-county metro area, there's 410 populations. And as of this year, 64% of them have been treated so far. So we may have only had one spot that we treated, but you know, it helps. It all counts towards that 64%. So pretty exciting to see such a large collaborative group working towards that common goal.
Garrett, before we leave Bone Lake, that's really exciting news again on Bone Lake. The only caution, I think it's more of a caution than a comment, but make sure that anyone that's coming into our district lakes with this kind of effort, and I'm talking about the Washington Conservation Service and their tow net and whatever else they're bringing with them, to make sure that they haven't been in a lake that has zebra mussels, that whatever equipment they're bringing in is clean, and we won't be introducing a potential new pathway for zebra mussels. You get what I'm talking about. I mean,
Absolutely.
Several years ago, we discovered that Washington Conservation Service was not cleaning the boat before they went from lake to lake, and so they would be in a infested lake, and then if Bone Lake or any other lake in our district was on the schedule for monitoring, they would just go from that lake to the previous lake to our district lake. So just make sure that we're maintaining that rigorous oversight on that area. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And in defense of Matt Downing, he's often asked me after doing monitoring or something if there was a decontamination unit nearby, and I would direct him towards it and he would use it. So
good, thank you.
But we'll reiterate that and make sure nothing's being brought into our lakes.
Okay.
Garrett, Manager Baki here.
Yes.
I would like to copy your Bone Lake year-end summary and post it on our Facebook, the Bone Lake Association Facebook page, and put it in the newsletter if we have room, if you're comfortable with that.
Absolutely, yeah. Are you just talking about the notes I just read through? Because I can send you those.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the report you submitted as part of the agenda for today.
Okay, yeah. Feel free to use whatever you want from there.
Yeah, it's about a page and a half, and I think I can just copy and paste that for our Facebook page. And it's good information. I don't think people are really aware of the dive that was conducted in September, and I think that's important information for people to know.
Absolutely.
You know, while the manager Schmaltz here, while Dave brought this up, I'd like to follow up on that because you haven't shown your new format that you're using for the AIS report today. And I thought that format was extremely good for just taking and then sending to the Lake Association members. And do you have a copy of one of your pages that we could look at on the new format that you put together? Did you bring that with you? It's a report you sent out to us.
You mean
within the AIS program year-end summary? Item A.
Did I bring it with? I'm sorry.
Yeah, usually you go through that report and not through the. I thought Blue Water Science was going to go through the actual AIS reports.
My presentation is based off that report that I included in the board packet, the AIS year-end report. I basically pulling the items that I talked about in there and just expanding on it a little bit.
My point is, I thought the new format was extremely good because the only suggestion I had is that while you listed what reports had been done, like these, zebra mussel study, if you make it an active link, then when it goes out to the Lake Association people, they can see the total picture of AIS and what's been done. And then if they will have an interest, they could click on that link and get more details on the delineation and the treatment programs that went in more detail.
Right.
I think
I'm sorry.
I wanted the board to see that. That's why I asked you to show it if you have it.
Okay, gotcha. So you're saying add links into that AIS year-end report that link you to other reports that I'm referencing.
Right. Plus the fact that if you publish that on our website, that format is excellent. And if the reports done by Blue Science are active listings, then they have everything they need right in that one little report. It's very powerful, I think. And again, I think because we're now going to be doing more communication based upon what happened on December 14th here, we need to get this out to the Lake Association members by email, like Dave has suggested doing. That would be great for each of the lakes.
Understood. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Okay, perfect. Appreciate the feedback. Oops, lost where I was. Okay, Little Comfort Lake Curlew Pondweed survey. So I've shown this again back in the summer. On July 22nd, myself and Bobby Law performed a early detection survey and meandering survey for CLP and kept an eye out for other AIS. The survey found primarily sparse growth around the perimeter of the lake. These red marks are obviously where it was found, but each of them, it was just maybe a couple stems here and there. Nothing that would warrant treatment, but it's always interesting that, you know, a lot of the time when we're finding curlyleaf pondweed in lakes that have a really dense band of native vegetation, which Little Comfort does, it might not be very diverse. It's mostly coontail and elodea, but we're finding the curlyleaf pondweed in areas of disturbance next to these docks and stuff. Not that these people are doing anything wrong. It's just, you know, there's some exposed lake bottom that's not being taken up by native species and kind of gives the curlyleaf pondweed a fighting chance in some of these lakes. In 2020, we did, or I did a purple loosestrife inventory on this lake, but besides that, again, we didn't find any other invasive species in the lake during the survey. Shields Lake Carp management, another one that I've done a recap on a number of times, but I'll just go through it again really quick. Just a refresher. In 2019, the district hired WSB to perform a electrofishing and gill netting removal attempt in Shields Lake. In total, only 71 carp were removed, and based off of a population estimate that was included in that removal effort, it was estimated that another between 364 carp and 630 carp needed to be removed. So in 2020, another removal attempt was conducted, but due to an alum treatment that occurred in the fall of 2019, presented a new challenge. We wanted to avoid disturbance of the lake bottom sediments that the alum had treated as much as possible. So we were looking for ways to get carp out without being in the main basin of the lake. And then due to some comments by the Gulf Coast workers mentioning that they had seen spawning activity in a pond that was north of the lake, we decided to put a one-way gate at the mouth of that and then block off the exit with gates to prevent them from escaping. But ultimately, that plan wasn't very effective. I think maybe for a number of reasons. One being that the water level that year was pretty low in the spring, and that channel wasn't flowing as much as I would have liked. But regardless, in 2021, staff and myself researched alternative options and spoke with researchers, but unfortunately, it just seemed like the only option that was ever brought up time and time again was electrofishing, which is typically not used as a main removal option, and the DNR is sometimes hesitant to even give out a permit to do electrofishing just for the sole purpose of removing carp. Typically, they only, you know, allow that as a tool for calculating the population. So that all said, I personally don't believe there's a major rush to perform another removal, as the age class data that we have from the population estimates and, you know, what we removed in 2019, it just appears that there's little successful carp recruitment in that lake, as all the fish that we took out were mature fish, very large fish. This suggests that the healthy panfish population within the lake is keeping their the carp population in check. And obviously the addition of the aeration system will further protect that population in the winter, making sure that they're healthy in the spring when carp are spawning. And then also the addition of the DNR's new bag limit for the lake, which I believe is 5 fish per day. And I really should know that off the top of my head, because I've pulled this sign out on the left here in this small photo. I pulled that out of the lake about a dozen times and stuck it back in the ground. But I think they slashed it in half, if not more. So hopefully that again helps protect that panfish population. So all that, I'm not saying that another removal attempt isn't possible for the near future, but I'd just like to keep exploring options to see what is a better return on investment than electrofishing. And I think several meetings ago, I did a breakdown, and you know, in 2019, I think out of the 71 fish, maybe 50 were moved electrofishing. And obviously, as you whittle down the population, you can expect to only get fewer and fewer with every attempt. So it gets to be pretty expensive per fish, and I just don't see that it being a very good way of getting them out. Another consideration for the future is that I spoke with a Swedish researcher this summer about carp removal and alum treatments. He's done some studies on this, and apparently you can adjust your alum treatment to account for the carp population in a lake and offset any phosphorus release from their foraging and digging. Obviously, we just did the alum treatment not that long ago, but it's something to consider for the future. And MACERC has a bunch of different studies that they're working on for carp management, like the koi herpes virus and some poison bait that's very specific to carp, and a lot of different things. So I'm hopeful in the near future that there's going to be a more effective removal option that will present itself that's cost effective, because right now, presently, it's very expensive.
Garrett, were
Yes.
you at the MOD conference?
I was not at the MOD conference.
Okay, there was a presentation by EOR, and EOR has a system where they trap and channel the carp into a pathway where they congregate, and so it's easier to remove them. And they use tags, radio tags on certain ones to help, you know, that's all part of the preliminary work that has to be done. But reach out to EOR and ask to see that presentation.
Sure.
I think you'd find that interesting and perhaps helpful for us.
Yeah, and that's kind of the idea behind the pond idea in 2020 that just didn't work. I think the struggle is that you know, I do a lot of lake monitoring now, and on other lakes I see carp spawning. I have not once seen anything spawning in Sheilds Lake. I know that they're still in there, but I just have not physically or visually seen them spawning and splashing. So that makes it a little more difficult too, of, you know, where to set up, where you would trap them and stuff. But yeah, I will. I'll certainly reach out and get a copy of that. That'd be great.
Okay.
All right. Sheilds Lake curly pondweed treatment. Sorry. So April 16th, Blue Water Science went out, did their survey, and then they found 3.17 acres they delineated for treatment. There has been a very heavy band of curly pondweed growing in this lake, as you can see, a lot of heavy growth, which we noted visually before the survey even took place. So 2 areas were delineated. That was treated in late May, I believe, and had very good results. Only 4 locations were left. Can't see it with the gallery here. Oh, yeah, 1 moderate growth and light growth. However, late summer, doing lake monitoring, myself and staff noticed a surprising amount of regrowth of curly pondweed, which was strange given that this was probably August when I noticed it, when water temps were still pretty high. So I'm not sure exactly what that's about, but we can definitely anticipate another large treatment next year. But like I was saying earlier about Moody Lake, I'm hopeful that as water quality improves from all the great projects the district has done, that it just naturally transitions from a curly pondweed dominant lake to more native. Lake Keewahtin AIS Early Detection Survey. So on September 23rd, myself and Trey went out. Oh, sorry. Nope. Getting ahead of myself. On June 24th, Blaine and myself went out and performed a meandering AIS survey. Locations of curly pondweed were marked with the GPS, as you can see all these dots. And observation notes were taken at each location. Again, only a sparse amount of curly pondweed growth was found in the lake, and didn't warrant any treatment. Each of these spots, you know, again, it was like a couple of stems here and there. So nothing to be concerned about, because again, this lake in particular has a very diverse and abundant native aquatic plant growth in the lake that's very much outcompeting the invasive species. So, and just like the Little Comfort Lake survey, again, it was locations of disturbance where we're finding curly pondweed being established near docks and boat lifts. Other than the curlyleaf and purple loosestrife, which we'll get to here in a second, we did not observe any other AIS in the lake. In 2020, I asked Blue Water Science to do a purple loosestrife survey on Keewahtin, just because having done monitoring that year with EOR, just noticing a lot around the perimeter. There was purple loosestrife eating beetles where we were launching our boat, but they just didn't seem to be having much of any impact on the population on the lake, as it was pretty widespread. So we just felt that in 2021, a herbicide treatment was our best bet to get a handle on things. So on September 23rd, PLM Lake and Land Management treated all the purple loosestrife around the perimeter of the lake. And then Trey and myself went out on October 14th to do a treatment assessment. And from what we can see shortly after treatment, it seemed pretty successful. We could tell exactly where things were hit. I think, especially in locations where it's really well established, like in this wetland area down by area 14, it'll take several years of treatment just because it is so thick and dense that it's hard for that herbicide to hit every single stem and kill it. But PLM said that the herbicide we were using was, he just had good results with it in the past, and that he does think we can get pretty good control after several years. So excited to see what things look like next year. Forest Lake curlyleaf pondweed treatment. April 30th, Blue Water Science went out, did their delineation, and there was a lot of curlyleaf this year, as you can see. There was 22 locations he delineated for 120 acres total. Typically, and I think it's in our normal monthly report, it states that we don't do more than 110 acres of treatment, just because with Aquathal K at that level, you can get enough dosage in the lake to have full lake control. However, this year, just like many other things, if you're doing home renovations, you notice the price of things is really skyrocketing. Aquathal K was about 3 times as expensive as Diquat, so that made that decision pretty easy. We went with the Diquat treatment, which it takes a little more, so what we ended up doing was all 120 acres. And from that, you can see on the right here, on June 9th, treatment was actually very successful within the delineated areas. It looks like there's a lot of curlyleaf left. And I mean, there is a fair amount, but that's likely due to some late season growth that occurred after Blue Water Science did their initial survey. So while there is still some remaining, I have to say that the treatment was overall very successful. And you know, there's just so much around the perimeter lake that's hard to hit every single one, but I think they've done a really good job with their delineation tactics to kind of delineate it all and have a good educated guess of where it's going to pop up. So I say overall successful. Eurasian water milfoil on Forest Lake. Delineation was performed on June 9th. And as you can see, very few light growth areas. We believe that having used Diquat this year for the curlyleaf pondweed treatment, that it inadvertently had some sort of control on the Eurasian water milfoil, which is great because I know the Lake Association was performing or anticipating having a very large treatment this year, which turned out to not, didn't need to happen. But they did receive some grant money. So a follow-up survey was done on July 27th, and they just found a little bit more light growth in the area, mostly in Basin 1, a little bit of Basin 2 that the Lake Association did treat with a combination of Diquat and Priscillacor. I know Priscillacor works better on larger populations, so it'll be kind of interesting next year if these locations still show some Eurasian water milfoil growth. But
Hey, Garrett, this is Manager Schmaltz again. Is Steve McComas going to speak today also or not?
I figured that this presentation was going to take a while, so I think we'll wait to have him on until January. And then
Okay.
he could do the deeper dive on the treatments and his thoughts on things.
Yeah, because I want to mention that that's pretty significant, and because that's the first year that we've had a big drop off in the amount of milfoil that we had to treat, and I think maybe one of the reasons was that we moved our schedule for treating curly leaf, later into the schedule. So that probably gave it. I wanted to confirm that with Steve to find out if that's really what happened, because if that's the case, it's a strategy we may want to follow in some other lakes, especially Bone Lake, where they're having trouble controlling the Eurasian milfoil. So we'll have to make a point of having Steve comment about that when he comes in.
That would be interesting because early treatment for curly leaf is typically the goal. And so you're saying that because it was done later, it was able to capture the Eurasian milfoil.
That's what the thought was, because it's so dramatic. If you look at and again, he's got some nice charts in his regular report that shows the history of curly leaf and the history of milfoil. And milfoil has been going up, and this is the first year it was down like 80%, 90%. So it'd be good to understand what there was something that caused that. So we need to get a better understanding of what the deviation was, that we might try to repeat that if we can control it.
Yeah.
So.
A question for Garrett. This is Manager Taves. Do you have any idea at this point how the low water levels might affect the weed growths?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we suspect that, and I'll kind of touch on this on some other point here soon, is that obviously with the low water level, light penetration is going to be increased. So we're going to see growth further towards the middle of the lake than we're used to. So it definitely could have an impact on the growth, and maybe that's why Sheilds Lake, we saw some late season growth of CLP. I'm not really sure, but certainly when it comes to the flowering rush, we'll talk to on it here on the next slide, I believe. We suspect that the low water levels really played a part in why there was so much flowering rush this year.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And I could try to speed some of this up if this is taking too long. I don't want to hog all the time here.
Garrett, I'm just gonna tell you that this is a very important report.
Okay.
And I really appreciate your comments of condensing the highlights, if you will, the important points. So I would like you to continue at the same pace that you're doing it throughout the balance, because
Sure.
we're getting in, we've still got a few lakes left. This is critical, for the reason we exist, which is clean water. And I think the priority for a lot of folks now, they see the clarity and all of that, but it's this invasive species attack, and keeping that under control. So just go ahead and do your report.
Sounds good. There is some watercraft inspection stuff at the end. So yeah, like I said, I'll try to be thorough and brief, but I feel like I'm hogging your time. Tell me to speed up. I won't be hurt. So we'll jump back into it, the flowering rush. So as I mentioned in the past, I did a literature review early in the winter, and based off that, as Manager Anderson was stating that, like pre-leaf pondweed, you want to treat it earlier typically for it to be most effective. Well, that's exactly what flowering rush was saying, but the difficulty in that is that when it wants you to treat is typically when it's not emergent yet, so it's very difficult to survey. So based off of historical patterns, Blue Water Science put together 3 locations on Basin 3 on the southern end where we believed there to be regrowth, and we treated that earlier than normal. So that was almost about 8 acres. On June 27th, he came back, did his survey, and you can see that, yeah, location 3, it looks like it probably had a pretty good effect. Location 1 maybe thinned it out a little bit, and location 2 maybe thinned it out a little bit as well. it's one of those things that I'll be having a meeting with Blue Water Science, the Lake Association, and our applicator, just to go over their thoughts on it, and maybe we can tweak things and do things better. But according to the literature, that's the way to go. So I think I'd like to try it again next year, just because we are running into a situation where our year-end acreage is remaining pretty steady. It's really hard to dip below that. So we're going to have to be kind of creative if we want to get lower and lower. So that said, another spot treatment was followed up on August 13th, about 3 acres in total, as you can see, primarily Basin 2, 3. Steve McCombs came back on September 9th. And as you can see, quite a bit of growth around the perimeter of the lake, even extending into Basin 1, which was surprising, typically not found there, which spurred the necessity to perform a third treatment, which was on September 13th. Again, about 3 acres worth of spot treatments around the entire lake. And the final treatment assessment was performed on October 18th. As you can see, is very much thinned out, but still quite a few locations around the perimeter of the lake here. I believe in total, it ended at I think 0.11 acres flowering rush total at the very end, whereas in the past couple, or I'm sorry, 0.13 acres, where in the past several years it's been around 0.08 acres. So a slight bump up, but considering how much was in the lake, I would say overall very successful, which ties into what I was kind of talking, or what Manager Taves was alluding to with the low water levels. So in past years, we would partner with the WCD because they had the boat, and Matt Downing was always very gracious to help out with the flowering rush seed head removal. In the last couple of years, that would take maybe a half a day to go around, clip a couple hundred seed heads, and then we'd call it a day. This year, it took 3 full days just for myself and staff. Peter and Aiden came out with me. Photo on the bottom here is Peter picking some of the seed heads, and then we decontaminated our boat after every single outing just to make sure that we weren't spreading any seed heads to our other lakes when we were doing lake monitoring in between the removal efforts here. And then I made this map here, and as you can see, there is a lot of locations of flowering rush that we had to remove. And yes, the water level was very low this year. A lot of aquatic growth, and in fact, we basically had to walk the boat the entire shoreline because there was just so many, and it was so shallow that it wasn't even worth turning the boat on. So made for a very long couple of days, but in total, we clipped over 1,100 seed heads, and I believe Steve McComa said that he clipped a couple hundred himself. The reason being that, yes, the low water level is believed to have created conditions that are a little more favorable for the flowering rush. In this bottom photo, you can see how much the water is receded, and you can see the flowering rush here growing where this would typically be underwater. There was a lot of locations just like this where the water had receded and there was some exposed lake bottom. And in those locations, we typically found a lot of, dense patches of flowering rush with a lot of flowering seed heads. So that's our best explanation of why it was so bad this year. We hope that next year the lake levels return to normal. It's definitely been getting quite a bit of precipitation so far. We'll see if that continues, and hopefully not have to do quite so much with the seed heads, but we did our best to get them all.
This is a little aside, but that very situation that you were describing is on, there's a little clip video on the DNR website that talks about there are certain native plants that only reseed when the water levels are low. And so these periodic low levels that we have, sometimes there are 10, 15 years between low levels like this, but that's when those particular plants look for to reseed. And they weren't talking about flowering rush. They weren't talking about AIS. They're talking about native species that reseed in that kind of sequence. So I thought that was interesting, and I hope we have a lot of pictures of Forest Lake from this year where we could see this kind of area that should have been underwater but isn't. I'm sure Steve has lots of them, but we might want to take some kind of effort to gather those pictures from lake residents, just so that we have a historical record of what happened. It was very unusual to see the lake that low.
And Manager Anderson, up here on Moody, I noticed at one point they dug a trench back to the water level gauge just to get a measurement of how low the water was.
Wow.
When the last time I did the measure there, it was 1.5. And this summer it was all the way off the bottom of the scale and into the mud. So
Wow.
we may see some interesting things coming up here.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, definitely part of the natural cycle of lakes. And I wasn't saying that there isn't any benefits of low water level, but it definitely made a heck of a time for us this year with the flowering rush. So it's all right. All right. Comfort Lake Curlew Pondweed, again, last handful of years really hasn't been much of an issue. I think maybe back in 2015 or 16, there was a 1 acre treatment, but never really been much of an issue. And as you can see, April 16th here, couple light growth patches, one heavy and one heavy on the south. Not much. A follow-up survey was done on June 24th, and it actually was even less. So happy to see that. Then, sorry, my notes. Moving on to the Comfort Lake Eurasian Water Milfoil. So a delineation was performed on April 16th and found sparse light growth around the perimeter of the lake with some dormant growth represented by these brown boxes here. The Lake Association, as I've mentioned, they've purchased their own boat and application equipment and got a permit from the DNR to do a 6.9 acre treatment, which I believe was performed on May 28th at these 4 locations. Steve Comus went back out on June 24th, and you can see that within the delineated areas, treatment seemed pretty effective, a little bit of regrowth in some of these locations. But then Lake Association commented that they wanted to do another treatment in the fall. So Steve McComas went back out on August 20th. And as you can see, quite a lot of Eurasian water milfoil around almost the entire perimeter of the lake, a lot of heavy growth, moderate growth. So a treatment that was partially funded by the Washington District through a grant. They used that to do a 8.05 acre treatment at the public access and to the right of it on the east shore. And then going over to October 18th, the final treatment assessment. You can see there's still quite a bit of Eurasian water milfoil around the perimeter, but it did effectively thin it out at the public access in that east or northeast corner.
Just to follow up on that, I just wanted to say that was the real concern, is that we saw a real explosion of Eurasian milfoil on Comfort this year. Don't know why, but it was noticeable enough that Lake Management reported it along with our Comfort Lake Association president to the DNR, and we are working on doing an all lake treatment at the DNR's suggestion in next year in 2022. And that notice just came this morning from our president that was accepted by the DNR. And so they have approved that all lake treatment for next year. And Garrett, you're on that work group too, so you probably got that same notice, but.
Yes, I will try to attend that meeting as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the last slide for the AIS report before we move into the watercraft stuff. This is a photo of Blaine and myself out doing a hybrid Eurasian water milfoil study. So on September 15th, we were on Forest Lake, and I think a couple days prior we were on Comfort Lake, but we were collecting samples as part of a Montana State University / Army Corps of Engineers joint study on hybrid EWM distribution. So all they asked us to do was collect 20 some samples per lake of suspected Eurasian water milfoil or potentially hybrid, dry it, send it through the mail to them, and they're going to take a look at it genetically, determine whether or not it is hybrid Eurasian water milfoil. This study has already been done on Bone Lake. It's on MACERC's website, but Forest Lake and Comfort Lake have yet to be confirmed. So it is part of a much larger study. So the results might not be available for a while, but we hope by the end of next year, we can confirm whether or not there is the presence of hybrid or not in either of those lakes. All right, so Watercraft inspection year-end report, same thing as the other report. I try to go in order as it's presented in the report. So if you'd like to follow along, certainly can. But with that, we'll just dive in. So this is the district-wide inspections and surveys. Not as busy as last year, but busy nonetheless. In total, Watercraft inspectors performed 9,177 inspections over the course of just over 3,500 hours. So compared to last year, that's almost 1,200 inspections, give or take, less, and about 130 hours less. So considering that between our staff here at the district and who we partner with at Chisago, that we had 8 less inspectors working over the course of the entire season. 128 hours less isn't too bad. And admittedly, the DNR definitely helped out a lot this year as they worked more than double the hours compared to 2020. But that was all focused on Forest Lake for obvious reasons, just being the most busy. So very grateful for them for doing that. Hiring has always been kind of a challenge for this position, but this year especially, obviously it's not just us. You look everywhere, there's hiring signs. But that was despite advertising the position more than we have ever done before. I mean, social media posts, online job boards, we hung flyers, Jessica printed signs that we stuck in the ground at the public accesses. We had inspectors hand out flyers to people they thought were interested. The Lake Association had advertised for us, and I even reached out to several local schools and even recruited my wife, who's an English teacher, to pitch the job to some of her students. So any way possible, we're trying to get people in the door. But despite all that, we still met all of our goals district-wide, and I think we did a really good job and performed as many inspections as possible. So moving on to the district-wide inspections in hours per week, very standard graph. I think the graph almost looks like this every year, where you have the big spikes around the holidays and then a pretty steep drop off around mid to late August, when a lot of our inspectors who are college age are returning to school. But again, despite the staff shortage, we were able to maintain our weekly hour goal. From about week 4. Before that was a lot of onboarding, getting people trained in and whatnot. We sustained it from week 4 until about week 17, so almost the end of August. So we had really good coverage for a lot of the major holidays in the summer months when it's obviously the busiest. District-wide inspections in hours per day. So this is just looking at, how many inspections were performed Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so on, and how many hours were worked. So in a year, when you have full staff of inspectors, kind of like last year, we had a few more inspectors of our own. Prioritization is important, but the goal is really just trying to get as much coverage as possible with as many people you have. Because if you have full staff, you don't have to be quite so particular about when people are working, as just fill up the schedule as much as possible. But in a year like this year with limited staff, prioritization was key in ensuring we were being as cost effective as possible while reaching the most amount of people possible. So that said, obviously we're working Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays the most. Chisago helps out on mostly Monday through Thursday, providing inspections during that time frame. But obviously those weekend shifts are when things are the busiest, which accounted for about 60% of the total hours worked this year. But more than that, taking a step further, inspectors were scheduled more strategically during the day. So shift times could start anywhere at like 6 a.m. and not work until, but could end at 9 p.m. So rather than doing what we have done in the past when we had a lot of staff is, try to fill that block from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. We're using the inspection data from the past year to see when traffic is the highest. It's kind of that middle ground in between the two. So that's when we're trying to station people so that we can be as cost effective as possible and just reach as many people as possible. That way we're educating and just ensuring that there's no contaminants entering or leaving.
Garrett,
Yes.
Manager Bakke here. I just, can you give me your impression as to whether the educational impact is really making a difference in behavior as far as people being sensitive to making sure their boats are clean before they launch them? I mean, I'm looking at your survey results and the number of watercrafts that had contaminants, and then you break down the data by year, and I would guess the number is increasing because we're doing a better job of inspecting. We have more hours of inspection, but what's your overall impression of, is there an educational impact that's making a difference, do you think?
I think there is. I will talk. I was going to touch on this at some point in here, but I'm trying to think of an example. I think 10 years ago, if you told someone that they shouldn't dump their bait bucket water into the lake or live bait in the lake, they'd be like, "Oh, why? It doesn't make any sense. They're fish. They belong in the lake." And admittedly, I was in the same boat. I grew up in a lake. I had no idea. And we implemented a behavior change project this year to educate anglers on proper bait disposal practices. And I'll touch on this, but while limited our data was this year, and we hope to get more next year, it did seem like a lot of people were already aware of stuff like that. Another example that I've heard at meetings with the DNR with a bunch of other watercraft inspection program coordinators is the drain plug seems to be less and less of an issue. I think that's probably the top behavior issue that has changed over the years. It just, and as you can see, I mean, we had 6,100 entering boats this year across district wide, and only 33 of them showed up with drain plugs in. So that is a very, very small fraction of what the total was. And I would have to compare the percentages from the past, like 2018 and 2017, of how many boats entered and what that percentage of violations were. But I really do feel like over time, things are getting better in terms of that. And it's obviously not an overnight thing. It takes time, but I think the drain plug is a really good example of people adopting that behavior.
Well, doesn't the contaminants found entering the lakes also speak to not just our education program, but the DNRs and everybody else's? Because they're clearly cleaning their boats before they come into our water bodies, most of them anyway. But because I thought that was interesting, and then the contaminants found exiting, of course, is they're picking up things within our lakes that have the AIS. So
yeah, I'll touch on that here in a second. I don't try to focus too much on the exiting stuff just because it's unavoidable. On Forest Lake, I mean, they pull out of the lake and the inspector's right there and they go, "Yep, you got a bunch of stuff hanging off your trailer." So that's a mark, but it's all cleaned off before they leave. So yes, I will get to that here in a second. Okay.
But just to clarify though, it wasn't that we're not doing our job. It's that on that first bar chart, contaminants found entering the lakes, that was really the point, is that that's a very low number. So people are either through inspectors being present at other lakes or people's habits changing so that they're not bringing contaminants into the water bodies.
Absolutely. And yeah, when we're training our watercraft inspectors, I always tell them that this is not an enforcement position. It's educational, because there are more hours in the week that are not being inspected than there are being inspected.
Exactly.
So we want people to adopt these behaviors because it's in their best interest. If you like fishing, then you really should be doing these things to protect that fishery. So
Yep.
that's always what we try to really drill into our watercraft inspectors. I can't remember where I was at. I'll just start from the beginning. So yes, there was 6,100 entering boats district-wide, but there were only 65 contaminants found trying to enter the lake. And again, contaminants could be anything from plants, animals, water, mud, or anything that has the potential to harbor invasive species. And additionally, as we touched on, there were 33 boats that arrived with drain plugs in. So yeah, given this was the second busiest year on record for the district in terms of hours or inspections performed, these numbers are fairly low. And then on the flip side, out of about 3,100 exiting boats district-wide, there were 786 boats that exited the lake with contaminants, particularly plant debris. So while this was far less numerically wise than last year, the percentage of exiting boats with contaminants saw about a 13% increase from 2020, which means that about 26% of boats pulled out with some sort of contaminant. And again, it goes back to the low water levels. So what we think is a likely explanation is just, more light penetration in the shallower water, increased aquatic plant growth and navigation channels from the access. And very easy to pick it up on your way into getting your boat out of the water. But again, all of our watercraft inspectors make sure that these these watercrafts and trailers are contaminant free before they exit. And we even give our watercraft inspectors rakes to help clear debris from the accesses, but at times, and I can attest to how difficult and sometimes impossible it is to keep the access clear, is just not feasible. Especially Forest Lake 3, we launched there a lot for our lake monitoring activities, and there have been times where the boat was darn near stuck right there at the access because there was just a big floating bog of stuff. So unavoidable at times, but we make sure that our watercraft inspectors are assisting as much as possible to help clean that, and then also, educating the values of the boater to do that themselves. Here's the graph that I added last year to the report that just lists how many boats reported last being in a water body that has one of these invasive species. This is likely an underestimation just because a lot of the time they don't give enough information in the survey to determine which lake specifically they were in, or they just give us some, bogus answer that is very unhelpful. But it at least gives us a general idea of what the risk is for certain things. So unfortunately, Starry Stonewort saw about an 18 boat increase from last year, as 48 watercrafts reported last being in a lake infested with it. But to put this into perspective, this only accounts for about less than 1% of incoming boats. So while that is a very small percentage of incoming watercrafts, the district watercraft inspectors are still given throw rakes and identification books and survey charts, and they're performing early detection surveys at the majority of their shifts around the public access, looking for things like this. So we're keeping an eye on things. And I believe even Steve McComas in his zebra mussel survey on Bone Lake was taking a look at it. I know that the Lake Association for Forest Lake has hired him to do diving surveys around the access for Starry Stonewort. So we're definitely keeping an eye out for stuff like this, but it is a low percentage. The risk is fairly low, but obviously, as we know, it only takes one. So we're doing what we can. Spiny water flea is the other one of concern. So this actually surprisingly saw a reduction of 62 boats compared to last year, as only 96 boats reported last being in the lake. infested with AIS. So roughly a 2% of boats were last in a spiny water flea infested lake. Potential future education things that we can add once we really get the bait law educational piece established is I know MACERC, they did a study on how spiny water flea is probably transported, and they found that out of towing anchor ropes and putting bait buckets in the water with rope and fishing line, that the fishing line was #1 in capturing spiny water flea. And then they did some crazy study where they tested a bunch of different fabrics and they created some towels that you can use to wipe off your fishing line that are most effective. So they have those for sale on their website. And it's something that I'm potentially considering including in our handouts, because this year we did some educational handouts like floating keychains and some sunglasses, which some of you picked up at some of our meetings that we had this summer. It's just fun educational stuff that we can hand out, and it just helps boost the perception of the Watercraft inspection program, because while most people are very supportive of it, there are still the handful that are a little hesitant to get on board. So the more swag and fun stuff you can help out or hand out, hopefully the better we're perceived. So all right, getting close. I'll just quickly go through each of the lakes and their individual hours and inspections. So Bone Lake, we reached our management goal, or our goal, like I stated, for all the lakes at 542 hours this year, which resulted in about 747 inspections. So as you can tell, we worked about the same amount of hours as last year, but we saw quite a dip in the amount of inspections we performed, like 250 inspections less, or 300 rather. Yeah, 300 inspections less. Last year, it was crazy busy. Parking lot, many occasions, even during the week, was completely full. There was cars parked down the highway, and there was just a noticeable decrease this year for whatever reason, which, we want people to enjoy our lakes, but it does limit the risk. So not entirely a bad thing. Then the Watercraft contaminants and drain plug violations, again, when you do the percentages, it's fairly low for all the things. Like there's only 2 boats trying to come in that had some sort of contaminant, probably plant debris, which was most of the violations. Exiting boats, fairly low. Sometimes you get a north wind on Bone Lake that'll push some of the debris up, but overall, it's one of the cleaner lakes to exit. And then drain plug violations being pretty low. Forest Lake, again, worked about the same amount of hours as last year, 2,454 hours in total, and performed 7,605 inspections across the whole board. Again, obviously, the busiest lake that we have, we prioritize Forest Lake 1. Forest Lake 3 is our second one, and then Forest Lake 3 we fill in with extras. And because of that targeted approach, we had an inspection rate of about 3.1 boats per hour, which compared to Bone Lake, we had 1.38 boats. So almost over double the amount of traffic. So we're just trying to be as targeted as possible, use the resources that we have, and make sure that we're reaching as many people as possible. Again, same story as the last lake, with just exiting violations being very high for Forest Lake, the north wind blowing to base or access 2 and access 3, that little bay really fills up with debris, and we have to do a lot of cleaning for those. And then Comfort Lake, kind of the same story as Bone Lake, where we worked about the same amount of hours, but we saw a pretty big dip in the amount of boats showing up, so about 400 less. We still perform 554 hours of inspections and 825 inspection surveys in total. Around the same inspection rate as Bone Lake at 1.49, so just a little bit higher. And again, same survey with, or same sort of deal with contaminants and exiting contaminants, even less than Bone Lake actually. Fairly clean lake access compared to Forest Lake. So there's that. And then I already kind of touched on this, but I'll go over it really quick. Was the DNR behavior change grant, which we were awarded in 2020. Again, out of a big list of risky AIS pathways, we picked bait disposal as one that we wanted to address. And using the grant money, we built these bait disposal stations because, the only other alternative typically, I mean, we do have trash cans at our accesses, but having something that you can look at and go, yep, that is specifically for bait disposal, it really helps drive home what we're trying to do, rather than, dumping your bucket of unwanted bait back into the lake, which is a very risky behavior. So this was the sign that Jessica and I designed, but we obviously received a lot of feedback from our partners with Chisago County and the WCD. Each of them got 7 bait disposal stations. I wanted to include them on the project just because I think having consistent, advertising or marketing, whatever you want to call this, across political boundaries is important, just because there are so many different educational signs out there, and I just wanted to have some consistency within at least this local area. So this is what we came up, really simple stuff, just asking people to dispose of the bait, why you should know it, know the law, and then some things not to throw into it, which I don't think people read because there's all sorts of trash in there, but that was to be expected. At least on a number of occasions, we did find minnows and stuff in there, even if it was late in the season. So people are using them. And then this is a bait bucket sticker. It's a bad photo of it. It looks much better in person, not so grainy. This is just part of that behavior change thing of that, people are more likely to adopt behaviors if they make some sort of public commitments. So our watercraft inspectors were asked, to ask anglers, are you willing to do the right thing, yada, yada, yada. And if they say yes, then you hand them the bait bucket sticker. And that's kind of like a commitment. It's like they don't want to break their promise. So that was the thought behind it. Or it's just a really cool sticker, and then we enjoyed it. So like I said, we implemented this kind of late in the season. A lot of coordination with the partners and the DNR, making sure everything was ready to go. So we didn't get a lot of data, but I would like to implement this right from the get-go next year. We have all the materials printed. The bait disposal stations are out for all WCD, Chisago, and ours. So it'll be exciting to collect more data and see how effective it really is. And then the recap, I'll try to be brief. So yeah, a lot of successful treatments this year. There was a little bit of curly leaf left on Forest Lake, but overall, considering everything, everything went really well. Excited to see how effective purple loosestrife treatments were. I think I failed to mention it, but we did do a treatment for purple loosestrife on Forest Lake. I just wasn't able to get out on the water. I got a little too cold to perform that assessment. So we'll get out next year and do an assessment survey. Hoping to get the hybrid Eurasian water milfoil results back by the end of next year. The Watercraft inspection program, we met and exceeded all of our hours for all the lakes. And then lastly, we finally implemented the DNR behavior change grant. Looking forward to next year. Like I said, we're going to meet with our applicators and partners and trying to tweak the application timing and approach, specifically for flowering rush and purple loosestrife. We're going to continue researching carp removal strategies. Like I said, a lot of exciting research coming out of MESERC with the Coy's herpes virus, targeted baits, and I guess the EOR study that I'll have to take a look at. So we'll be doing that. Going to work with staff and partners to develop more effective position advertising for the watercraft inspection position. I anticipate this year being difficult as well, given everything going on. So we're gonna have to figure out how to be more competitive with that and get people in the door. Like I said, implement behavior change grant right at the start of the season. I'd like to get that out, get more stickers handed out, encourage the bait bucket or the bait disposal station to be used more. And then kind of already touched on it, but just continuing to keep up to date with MESERC and other research for AIS management activities that we could add to our list that's always growing. For instance, at the MESERC showcase back in October, I think, there was a study on cutting corridors and invasive cattails to improve fish habitat. Final results haven't been published yet, but it seemed promising, and I could really see something like that being done in Sheilds Lake. where there's a lot of cattails around the perimeter of the lake. And that'll just be another thing to further help improve the health of that fishery and suppress the carp population. But all right, that was a lot. If there's any questions, I can take some of those, but I'm sure you're all sick of hearing me talk. So,
Well, thank you for a very good report and the work that you do.